Hi guys, welcome to the third video of the Golang and JWT Authentication tutorial series. So we had started working on our user-controller.go file. We had written out all these functions, and now we want to start working on these functions. Now the get user function is the easiest function of them all. So I'll start first working on that, and then we'll tackle sign up and login functions. All right. So the get user function, you need to remember that only the admin can have access to the user's data. Not a regular user cannot simply go ahead and start accessing the data of other users. All right. So this means that this API, the data that's coming from this API, if it's the data of another user, then a regular user cannot access it. Only the admin can access it. Okay. I hope that makes sense. So with that out of the way, now let's start working on this function. So Gin gives us access to handler functions. So if you don't use Gin, you know that you have to use http.handle functions, right? But Gin gives you access to its own handler functions. These brackets will be shifted here because the function is actually get user. And here we can start writing the definition of the function. So this returns a function which takes in gin.context, and first you need to get the user ID because that's the user that you want to access. So you'll say c.param user ID. So with the help of C, you can access the parameters sent from Postman using the API to the Golang function. So you can access it using user ID. And why is this user ID and not ID? It's because in your user route you have mentioned user ID. If you said only ID, then you would have written just ID here, right? So, but if you're written user ID, I usually do this just to like, for example, if I had a products and orders route, I would definitely write product ID and user ID, order ID there. It just makes things clearer instead of just keeping ID everywhere, right? So this is a good practice to have. Now, you know that on my channel, there are more than 100 Golang videos, right? And for all types of videos, I try and follow a different project structure and almost different frameworks. So in this case, I'm using Gin-Gonic, but mostly I use, in many cases, I use Mux, and some cases I use Fiber. So, so you know that, I've worked on multiple different project structures, multiple different frameworks. And I can tell you that this project that we're making right now has one of the best project structures out of all the projects that I've done on my channel till now. So if you want to use this further and you want to improve on it, and you want to create some other project using this project structure, I would highly recommend you do that. Like having these different folders for controllers, database helpers, all of these different things, and the way I've kept these files. So for example, if you had product and orders also, you can just have product router.go and order router.go similarly out here. So why I'm saying that is because this is a very, very solid project structure. I've worked on really big production sized application, and we've scaled them to hundreds and thousands, if not millions of users. So and these kind of project structures, they scale really, really well. Now, obviously, I'm talking about monolith only, not microservices. I will show you microservices using gRPC. So that's a complete different animal altogether. So if you're more comfortable with microservices, definitely have using a microservices project structure is much better. But if you want to use a monolith, this is the right way to go. All right. And now that we have user ID in our user ID here, I'll call my helper file, and then I'll have a function called match user type to UID. I need this function because I want to check if the user is an admin or not. All right. So this takes C and this takes user ID. And I'll make this equal to error. So I'll say if error equal to. And if error not equal to nil, that means there is an error. Then you'll say c.json http.status bad request. You can send a bad request like this: gin.header error error dot error. okay, and then you'll return from this. Now instead of going further with this function, what I'll do is I'll actually work on this match user type to UID function, because that'll then give you a little more context into what we're doing exactly. So go over to your auth helper file. In your auth helper file, you'll say package helper. You'll import a couple of things. I can tell you right now that we definitely need errors, and we need Gin-Gonic. So we'll say Gin-Gonic/Gin. The function that we're working on right now that we want to use is called match user type to UID. So let's work on that. So you'll say func match user type to UID. You already know that it takes C, which is gin.context. It takes user ID, which is a string. You can check that again. You can see that it's taking C and user ID. And then it returns an error. So we'll say user type equal to c dot get string user type, and UID equal to c dot get string UID. Error to begin with is nil. Now we'll do the magic where we'll say user type. If the user type is user and not, which is basically means that it's not admin, and UID is not equal to that person's user ID. Right? Because we want the user to only access his own user data. A user cannot access the user data of any other user. But if it was admin out here, then he could have done anything. So that's why we're checking if it's user and his UID is not equal to user ID. Then we'll say that obviously you cannot access it, right? So you'll say error is equal to errors.new, because we're using the errors package. We'll use errors.new unauthorized to access this resource, and we'll return the error. And here we'll also call a function called check user type. We'll pass C and user type to it. So this function is a helper function, so we'll work on it right now itself, and we'll equate it to error, and we'll return the error from here on this function. Let's work on the check user type function. So we'll say func check user type c star gen dot context, and role, we're passing a role here which is of type string. So your user type basically is what you're passing here. We're using that as role here, which is basically admin or user. And this also returns an error. So here you'll say user type equal to c dot get string user type, error is equal to nil, and if user type is not equal to role, we'll say errors dot new unauthorized to access this resource, and we'll return the error, and at the end also we'll return the error. Right, so this function returns an error which is caught here, and then this error is returned. So everything looks great. So that's our entire logic to ensure that only admins get access, otherwise to a user's data, otherwise unauthorized to access. And if the user is only requesting his own data, then it's all right. Then we don't have any issues. All right. So going back to our user controller, now we want to start working with the database. Okay. So we'll say where cdx, sorry, not in capital, where cdx comma cancel is equal to context dot with time out context dot background comma 100 multiplied by time dot second. So we've given it a timeout, and now we'll define a variable called user, which is equal to models dot user. The models you have already defined here. So we're creating a variable which is a representation of the struct. And now we can easily find this user from our database. We have to get a user from our database using the user ID. Okay, so how do we do that? We'll say user collection, which is a variable defined out here, dot find one. We pass the context, and then we say user ID equals to this user ID. Okay. Then all you need to do is decode this data. So you already know that MongoDB saves data as JSON, right? And Golang doesn't understand JSON. Since Golang doesn't understand JSON, that's why we created the struct in the first place. Now we can decode the JSON information into the information that Golang understands, which is strings and all of those. So that's why we use the decode function. All right. So this is the only part I think where you might get confused. This line. Otherwise, everything else is very standard Golang, right? We're just using the context package, and we're just using helpers. So that's quite straightforward. I'm sure you might get confused here. So that's why I explained what we're doing here. And so we're just getting that user by ID. All right. And then we'll equate this to the error, and we'll use defer cancel, and then we'll just check for the error. So if error is not equal to nil, then you'll say c.json http dot. So here instead of bad request, because it's not a bad request, it's actually a server error, so I'll say status internal server error. Now this is not a big program, so I'm not having my own separate file where I define all types of errors, like bad requests and validation errors and internal server errors. I'm not doing that, but if I think in the next series I might create a bigger project, and then I'll probably show you how you can have status code, how error codes, and how you can have error handler methods in a completely separate file. All right. Now this project is not that big, so I don't want to make it more complicated. So that's why I'm handling error out here itself. So here you'll say gin.h error dot error. Okay, and we'll return from this function. From here you'll return c.json. If everything goes well, we need a status okay, and we'll pass the user. We'll pass the data of the user. Okay. So after decoding, you'll get the data in user, which is this, and you can pass the user from this function. Alright, now we need to work on our sign up function. So let's come here, and for sign up it's the same, it's gin.handler func, and we'll return function which accepts C, which is basically gin.context. We'll say var cdx comma cancel is equal to context dot with timeout context dot background comma 100 multiplied by time dot second, and we'll create a variable that, like we did here, called user. It's of type models dot user. Now sign up function creates a user in the database. That's why you need to do this. Okay. So we'll use the c dot bind JSON function. And we'll equate that to error. If error not equal to nil, then we'll say c.json http.status bad request gin.h error is error.error. Return from here. We'll also handle validation out here. So we'll say validation error validate, which is this we've defined already, validate.struct user. So whatever data you have in your user, you're going to compare that out here and you're going to validate it. That's how you're using the validate function. If validation error is not equal to nil, then you'll say c.json http.status bad request gin.h error is validation error.error and return. Okay. Then you must have seen that I also in the Postman, when we were using Postman in the beginning of the project, we were also returning the count of the users. So let's get the count. We will say user collection dot count documents cdx comma json.m email is user.email, and we'll defer cancel, and here we'll handle the error. So if error not equal to nil, so here we'll say log dot panic error and c.json http dot status internal server error comma gin.h error, and here we'll say error occurred while checking for the email. So in all the other functions like get all users function, we're going to use this count to show the count. But in this function, in the sign up function, we'll use count to actually help us validate. So if you find any documents with this email already, that means the count is more than 0, then we can handle it. And similarly for phone number, we can check the same. All right, so let's also use the same concept for phone number, and here we can say count comma error user collection dot count documents ctx comma pson.m phone. Here we'll say user dot phone. Right, and after that we'll do the same thing, defer cancel, and if error not equal to nil, we'll say log dot panic error c.json http dot status internal server error gin.h error occurred while checking for the phone number. And now we can handle this. Like I said, if count of any of these is more than 0, then you can say gin.h this email or phone number already exists. Perfect. Now guys, I'll have to stop early. It's already 20 minutes, and I know this series is going for too long. I thought it'll just take 20 minutes, but I've already created 3 different videos of 20 minutes each, and it's still we're still quite far away from actually completing the project. I mean, I'm trying to. The thing is, if I try to make very small videos, then you don't get the correct project structure, and I get a lot of complaints saying that you keep everything in the main.go file, and if I try to have different folders and files, then it takes a while to actually include everything and then refer through those functions and then actually build everything. So as you can see, it's taking time because we have all these different files and folders, but the project structure that you'll get here is going to be solid, and you can use this to build bigger projects. So I'd like to apologize to you that it's taking more time, but even I have seriously underestimated how much time it'll take. I thought it'll take 20 minutes, but it's taken more than 60 minutes now with 3 videos of 20 minutes each. And but I'll have to rush. I have to rush somewhere, so I'll have to carry on in tomorrow's video. Really sorry, I wanted to complete this in one video, but what to do, it's we have to go with the right way, with the right project structure. So do subscribe to this channel, and thank you for following, and thank you for watching this video. Do subscribe, and thank you, and I'll see you in the next episode.